The 8,834th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in Afghanistan. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Afghanistan to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I would like to warmly welcome His Excellency the Secretary-General, Mr. António Guterres, and would like to give him the floor. Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellency, Mr. President, Excellencies, the world is following events in Afghanistan with a heavy heart and deep disquiet about what lies ahead. All of us have seen the images in real time: chaos, unrest, uncertainty, and fear. Much lies in the balance: the progress, the hope, the dreams of a generation of young Afghan women and girls, boys and men. At this grave hour, I urge all parties, especially the Taliban, to exercise utmost restraint to protect lives and to ensure that humanitarian needs can be met. Conflict has forced hundreds of thousands from their homes. The capital city has seen a huge influx of internally displaced persons from provinces around the country where they felt insecure or fled during fighting. I remind all parties of their obligation to protect civilians. And I call on all parties to provide humanitarians with unimpeded access to deliver timely and life-saving services and aid. And I also urge all countries to be willing to receive Afghan refugees and refrain from any deportations. Mr. President, now is the time to stand as one. The international community must be united and utilize all available instruments to ensure the following. First, we must speak with one voice to uphold human rights in Afghanistan. I call upon the Taliban and all parties to respect and protect international humanitarian law and the rights and freedoms of all persons. We are receiving chilling reports of severe restrictions on human rights throughout the country. And I am particularly concerned by accounts of mounting human rights violations against the women and girls of Afghanistan who fear a return to the darkest days. It is essential that the hard-won rights of Afghan women and girls are protected. They are looking to the international community for support, the same international community that assured them that opportunities would be expanded, education would be guaranteed, freedoms would be spread, and rights would be secured. Second, the international community must unite to make sure that Afghanistan is never again used as a platform or safe haven for terrorist organizations. I appeal to the Security Council and the international community as a whole to stand together, to work together and act together, and use all tools at its disposal to suppress the global terrorist threat in Afghanistan and to guarantee that basic human rights will be respected. Regardless of who holds power, these two fundamental principles, in which our world has such a deep and abiding interest, must be upheld. Mr. President, the United Nations is committed to supporting Afghans. We continue to have staff and offices in areas that have come under Taliban control. I am relieved to report that, in large measure, our personnel and premises have been respected. We urge the Taliban to continue to do so and to honor the integrity and inviolability of diplomatic envoys and premises. The humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan affects 18 million people, fully half of the country's population. It is vital that basic services continue to be provided. In a statement issued yesterday, the Taliban said that they would work with the existing institutions. It is crucial that civil servant salaries continue to be paid, infrastructure is maintained, airports are reopened, and health and education services continue. The United Nations presence will adapt to the security situation. But above all, we will stay and deliver in support of the Afghan people in their hour of need. Looking ahead, I call for an immediate end to violence, for the rights of all Afghans to be respected, and for Afghanistan to comply with all international agreements to which it is a party. Mr. President, Afghans are a proud people with a rich cultural heritage. They have known generations of war and hardship. They deserve our full support. The following days will be pivotal. The world is watching. We cannot and must not abandon the people of Afghanistan. And I thank you.
I thank the Secretary-General for his briefing. I now give the floor to the representative of Afghanistan. You have the floor, please.
Your Excellency, the President, Excellency, Mr. Secretary-General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you, Mr. President, for this opportunity to speak at yet another Council meeting on the situation in Afghanistan and for India's leadership of the Council during this critical period. We welcome the convening of this emergency session of the Security Council on the situation in Afghanistan and thank all the Council members, particularly Estonia and Norway, as co-pin holder of Afghanistan, for their role in organizing this session. Mr. President, today I'm speaking on behalf of millions of people in Afghanistan whose fate hangs in the balance and are faced with an extremely uncertain future. I'm speaking for millions of Afghan girls and women who are about to lose their freedom to go to school, to work, and to participate in the political, economic, and social life of the country. I'm speaking for thousands of human rights defenders, journalists, academics, civil servants, and former security personnel whose lives are at risk for defending human rights and democracy. I'm speaking for thousands of internally displaced people who are desperately in need of shelter, food, and protection in Kabul and other places. As you're witnessing yourself, the situation in Kabul, a city of about 6 million people, is extremely worrying, to say the least. You have seen chaotic scenes at the Kabul International Airport as desperate citizens are trying to leave the country. Mr. President, we are extremely concerned about Taliban's not honoring their promises and commitments made in their statements at Doha and at other international fora. We've witnessed time and again how Taliban have broken their promises and commitments in the past. We have seen gruesome images of Taliban's mass executions of military personnel and target killings of civilians in Kandahar and other big cities. Mr. President, we cannot allow this to happen in Kabul, which has been the last refuge for many people escaping violence and Taliban's revenge attacks. Kabul residents are reporting the Taliban have already started house-to-house searches in some neighborhoods, registering names and looking for people in their target list. There are already reports of target killings and looting in the city. Kabul residents are living in absolute fear right now. Mr. President, there is no time for blame game anymore. We have an opportunity to prevent further violence, prevent Afghanistan descending into a civil war and becoming a pariah state. Therefore, the Security Council and the UN Secretary-General should use every means at its disposal to call for an immediate cessation of violence and respect for human rights and international humanitarian law. Call on the Taliban to fully respect the general amnesty offered by them, cease target killing and revenge attacks, and abide by international humanitarian laws. Urge that no public institutions and service delivery infrastructure be demolished, including works of arts in museums and media institutions. Stress that anyone violating human rights of Afghan citizens and international humanitarian law will be held accountable. urgently establish a humanitarian corridor for the evacuation of those at risk of Taliban's retributions and attacks. Call on neighboring countries of Afghanistan to open their borders and facilitate exit of people trying to escape and entry of goods for humanitarian relief and operations. Call for the immediate establishment of an inclusive and representative transitional government that includes all ethnic groups and women representatives, which can lead to a dignified and lasting solution to the conflict, bring peace, and preserve the gains of the last 20 years, especially for women and girls. Stress that the Council and the United Nations will not recognize any administration that achieves power through force or any government that is not inclusive and representative of its diversity of the country. Unequivocally state that it does not recognize the restoration of the Islamic Emirate as reaffirmed in previous Council statements and agreements. Establish international guarantees for the implementation of a future political agreement. And finally, mobilize urgent humanitarian assistance for the 18 million people of Afghanistan, particularly those displaced by current conflict. The UN humanitarian appeal at $1.3 billion remain 40% funded. We urge the international community to meet the remainder of this life-saving appeal to provide critical aid to all internally displaced people. At the end, I would like to thank the United Nations and many other international organizations who are on the ground providing life-saving humanitarian support and monitoring human rights on the ground. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Afghanistan for his statement. I will now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of Estonia. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I welcome the presence and the strong messages of the Secretary-General and the representative of Afghanistan. Last week, we highlighted our grave concern that the number of civilians killed and injured in Afghanistan had reached the highest on record, with Taliban responsible for the largest share of casualties. Today, having declared control over Afghanistan, the Taliban bear even greater responsibility and accountability for the safety and security of all people in Afghanistan. Estonia calls for those in power, those in positions of authority, to adhere to international law, in particular international humanitarian law, and uphold the norms and standards on human rights. What has not changed is that more than half the population of Afghanistan is in need of humanitarian aid. It is of critical importance to ensure that humanitarian access is not hindered and that aid providers can work in safety. We call on all parties to allow immediate, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access for UN humanitarian agencies and other actors providing assistance. This is the time for building, repairing, and healing, not retaliating, looting, or profiteering. It is the utmost time to establish peace. The people of Afghanistan deserve peace and security. A sustainable end to the conflict in Afghanistan can only be ensured through an inclusive political settlement that upholds the constitutional protections for the rights of all people of Afghanistan, particularly women, children, and persons belonging to minorities. Only an inclusively negotiated political solution can lead to a durable peace in the country, as well as stability in the region. Mr. President, I would like to reiterate Estonia's commitment to the people of Afghanistan. However, our cooperation with any future Afghanistan leadership will be based upon its willingness to uphold the positive achievements of recent decades and act by the norms and standards of international law, including international human rights law. Our political and financial support continues to be conditional upon the preservation of the country's human rights and democratic achievements. We welcome the efforts of Afghanistan's neighbors and partners who have offered their help by providing shelter to those escaping the dangers and the uncertainties that accompany armed conflict. I would end with a special thank you to the UN mission in Afghanistan. The efforts of the mission are now more important than ever, as is the safety and security of their staff. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Estonia for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Norway. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for calling this emergency meeting on the situation in Afghanistan. Allow me also to thank the Secretary-General for his participation and his briefing, as well as the Ambassador Isaac Tsai for his remarks. To echo the Secretary-General and previous speakers, the situation in Afghanistan is extremely serious. Over the last few weeks, amidst an ongoing violent conflict, the national security and defense forces of the country collapsed almost in their entirety. Over the last 24 to 48 hours, the leadership of the central government has disintegrated. The country and its population are now facing a multi-layered crisis of very significant proportion. Suffering and hardship because of violent conflict, drought and food insecurity, and as well as the COVID-19 pandemic and other infectious diseases like polio and measles. We, the Security Council and the entire international community need to show our continued commitment to them in both words and actions. In this unprecedented situation, Norway calls for an immediate end to the violence in Afghanistan, the restoration of security and civil order, and urgent talks to resolve the current crisis of constitutional authority and to arrive at a peaceful settlement. The reality the international community now must contend with is that the Taliban movement exercises de facto control over much of Afghan territory, including the capital, Kabul. We have taken careful note of the statements by Taliban representatives during the last few days. These include assurances that the security and safety of all Afghans, diplomats and humanitarian workers will be guaranteed. It has been communicated that government workers, whether military or civilian, will not face retribution of any kind. Furthermore, Taliban representatives have stated that women and girls will have access to work and education. These are encouraging words. But the Taliban will be judged not by their words, but by their actions in the days, weeks, and months ahead. How the Taliban conduct themselves in actual deed will matter a great deal in terms of whether and how the international community will be willing and able to relate to, cooperate with, and support a future new Afghan government in which the Taliban participates. Restoring law and order in Kabul must have the utmost priority. There have been disturbing reports of looting and chaos. The current situation at and around Kabul International Airport is also unclear and deeply worrying. We call on all parties to ensure that all Afghan and foreign nationals who wish to leave the country can do so in a safe and orderly way. The ongoing violence across Afghanistan, including in urban areas, has caused grave harm to civilians, especially children, as well as the abruption of services and damage to civilian infrastructure, including those providing water and sanitation, food and education, and health services. Safe access to these services must be immediately restored. We are deeply concerned about the number of reported serious violations of international humanitarian law and human rights abuses in communities affected by the ongoing armed conflict across the country, and stress the urgent and imperative need to bring the perpetrators to justice. All parties must respect their obligations under international humanitarian law in all circumstances, including those relating to the protection of civilians. A sustainable end to the conflict in Afghanistan can only be achieved through an inclusive, just, durable, and realistic political settlement that upholds human rights, especially for women, children, and minorities. We express our support for the ongoing political and diplomatic efforts centered on both Doha and Kabul to ensure a transition that is orderly and prevent further bloodshed. We commend the ongoing diplomatic efforts by several key stakeholders, including the United States, Qatar, and Pakistan. The future new government must be united, inclusive, representative, and participatory. It must have the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women. it must adhere to Afghanistan international obligations, including with regards to respecting universal human rights. Finally, for peace builders, human rights defenders, journalists, and media workers, especially the brave women who for years have stood up for their rights and demanded equal participation and say in their future, the situation feels desperate. Consistent marginalization at negotiations, as well as reprisals and targeted violence against them and their family members, draws deep concern about their safety and the goal of an inclusive political settlement. In the current situation, we, the Council, and the wider international community all have a responsibility to ensure their protection and must use all means of support and diplomatic and political channels to amplify their voices and protect them from harm. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Norway for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Secretary-General Guterres, thank you for your sobering briefing and for your strong statement. Your role, along with your personal envoy, Jean Arnaud, and Special Representative Lyons and her team on the ground, is especially vital now. And as we enter an uncertain and crucial period that requires the international community to speak with a clear and unified voice. The United States deeply appreciates the continued efforts of UNAMA and other UN actors on the ground in Afghanistan that are continuing to provide life-saving assistance to Afghans in need. We also thank Norway and Estonia for calling this meeting and India for convening it given the events of the past 72 hours. And we welcome the participation of Afghanistan to this meeting. Over this past weekend, members of the international community joined together to state unequivocally that every Afghan should be able to live in safety, security, and dignity. We also called on all parties in Afghanistan to ensure safe departures and the protection of human life and property. Today, I want to reiterate, reemphasize, and reassert this call. Civilian populations, including journalists and non-combatants, must be protected. Attacks against civilians or civilian objects must stop, and the human rights and fundamental freedoms of all Afghan citizens, especially women, girls, and members of minority groups, must be respected. We also call on all parties to prevent terrorism, and we must all ensure Afghanistan cannot ever again be a base for terrorism. We also call on the Taliban to permit humanitarian organizations to continue their vital work in Afghanistan. In addition to the ongoing violence, the Afghan people are suffering acutely from the effects of COVID-19 and drought. These urgent humanitarian needs must remain top of mind for all of us in the coming hours, days, and weeks, and beyond. Humanitarian personnel and agencies must have safe, unhindered access to provide life-saving assistance to the increasing numbers of Afghans in need. We are deeply concerned that right now aid is not flowing to people in crisis. According to the World Food Program, more than 500 tons of aid are currently sitting at border crossings taken over by Taliban forces. These aid deliveries must resume immediately, and the World Food Program must have immediate and sustained safe passage to deliver this much-needed assistance. Finally and critically, all Afghan nationals and international citizens who wish to depart must be allowed to do so safely. President Biden has made clear that any action that put U.S. personnel or our mission at risk will be met with a swift and strong military response. The United States promises to be generous in resettling Afghans in our own country, and I'm heartened by the pledges we've seen from other nations to do the same. We need to all do more, and the time to step up is now. We urge Afghanistan's neighbors and others in the region and beyond to give refuge, to be it temporary or permanent, to Afghans attempting to flee. And together we must do everything we can to help Afghans who wish to leave and seek refuge. I will close where I began. The Afghan people deserve to live in safety, security, and dignity. We in the international community stand ready to assist them. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France. You have the floor, please.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président. Je vous remercie pour l'organisation de cette réunion à un moment tragique, historique pour l'Afghanistan. L'heure est grave, en effet, car une page se tourne et l'avenir de ce pays qui a tant souffert est plus incertain que jamais. Nous avons entendu le secrétaire général exprimer sa préoccupation et nous la partageons. Nos yeux sont tournés vers Kaboul, où la paix et la sécurité de l'Afghanistan, mais aussi de la région, sont en péril. J'aimerais en premier lieu rappeler notre ferme condamnation de la violence et des violations des droits de l'homme et du droit international humanitaire qui se produisent en ce moment même en Afghanistan. Toutes les parties au conflit doivent respecter leurs obligations et particulièrement la protection des civils. Nous appelons à un cessez-le-feu immédiat ainsi qu'au respect du droit international. Au milieu de cette violence, j'ai une pensée particulière pour tous ceux qui ont construit l'Afghanistan moderne d'aujourd'hui. Ils doivent être protégés. Leur protection, mais plus largement la protection des civils, en particulier des femmes et des enfants, doit être une priorité absolue. Les responsables d'exactions ne demeureront pas impunis. Ce Conseil doit rester attentif à l'évolution de la situation. Les civils, notamment les femmes et les enfants, ne doivent pas être oubliés. Les femmes doivent être protégées, leurs droits respectés. Les avancées démocratiques, la lutte contre la criminalité organisée, en particulier la lutte contre la drogue, la protection du patrimoine culturel, toutes ces avancées qui font que l'Afghanistan a rejoint depuis 20 ans le concert des nations ne doivent pas être effacées. La troisième priorité est bien entendu l'unité afghane. La paix ne peut se faire que si tous y participent. Enfin, la situation sécuritaire ne doit pas occulter l'urgence de la situation humanitaire. Le conflit augmente le nombre de déplacés, elle accroît les besoins déjà immenses de la population. L'aide humanitaire doit parvenir à tous, l'accès des personnels médicaux et humanitaires à l'ensemble des personnes dans le besoin, de même que leur protection, doivent être garanties. En conclusion, Monsieur le Président, je voudrais rappeler que la France se tient aux côtés de la population afghane et de tous ses partenaires pour avancer sur le chemin de la paix. Et le premier de ces partenaires est la MANUA. J'aimerais ici saluer le courage et le travail de l'ensemble des équipes de cette mission absolument remarquable, sous la houlette et la coordination de Deborah Lyons. Je souhaite également saluer l'action de Jean Arnaud. Les Nations Unies ont un rôle essentiel, indispensable à jouer en Afghanistan, mais elles ne pourront pas faire seules. L'engagement résolu de la communauté internationale aux côtés du peuple afghan sera tout aussi déterminant dans les mois et les années qui viennent. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Secretary-General, for your briefing. Mr. President, what is happening now in Afghanistan is a tragedy. We have long believed that the only path to a sustainable peace in Afghanistan and regional stability lay in a negotiated political settlement. We have worked hard to breathe life into peace negotiations between the Afghan government and the Taliban, working closely with the US, our leading allies, and other regional powers. The Taliban pledged at Doha to engage in those talks in good faith. Their actions on the ground have betrayed that promise. Mr. President, the Taliban must immediately do three things. First, they need to cease all hostilities and military action to ensure the protection of civilians and to allow the safe and orderly departure of foreign nationals and others who wish to leave. Second, They must commit unequivocally not to harbour or give safe haven to terrorist groups which endanger other countries. And third, the Taliban must honour their promises to protect and uphold human rights, including those of women, girls, and minorities. We have seen evidence of Taliban human rights abuses in areas where they have taken control, including persecution of minority groups, harsh restrictions on women, allegations of forced marriage, and using civilians as human shields. If the Taliban continue to abuse basic human rights, they cannot expect to enjoy any legitimacy in the eyes of the Afghan people or the international community. Mr. President, given the fragile security situation, Afghanistan is now facing a catastrophic humanitarian crisis. Lack of access has masked the true scale of the problem. Half the population were already in need of humanitarian assistance at the start of the year, and the situation is much worse now. The Taliban must respect international humanitarian law and permit humanitarian organizations to continue their work with unhindered, safe access to those in need. The United Kingdom has long been a leading provider of humanitarian aid to Afghans, both in Afghanistan and in the region. Over recent years, the UK has been proud to be one of the leading contributors to the Afghanistan Humanitarian Fund. We will continue to work with our partners in this Council, in the Human Rights Council, and most importantly, in the region, to deliver a more stable and inclusive Afghanistan for all its people. It is vital that the international community coordinate closely in the coming days and weeks to ensure that we speak with a single message in our engagement with Afghanistan. The UK will use its presidency of the G7 and membership of this Council to help forge such closer coordination and to address the humanitarian plight that the Afghan people now face. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Kenya. You have the floor, please.
Good morning. Mr. President, I have the honor to make this statement on behalf of the A3+1, namely Kenya, Tunisia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Niger. I thank the Secretary-General for his briefing on the latest developments in Afghanistan. The A3+1 reiterates its support for the stabilization efforts deployed by the UN in the search for a durable solution to the Afghan crisis, which has been developing in warring ways in the past few days. Mr. President, this meeting comes on the heels of a similar meeting we held on the 6th of this month. If at that time we still harbored hope, as slim as that might have been, for the Taliban to heed our appeal and stop their attacks, today we're faced with a fait accompli, with the effective collapse of the Afghan government and a takeover by the insurgents. The A3+1 deplores the violence, human rights abuses, and the loss of life and the suffering endured by the civilian population who were forced to leave their areas because of the latest combat all over the country. We reiterate our call for an immediate end to the hostilities. We reiterate our principal rejection for any seizure of power by force and call for the establishment of an effective dialogue, convinced that the only viable solution to this conflict is a negotiated political settlement. We take note of the discussions between the Taliban and the different Afghan stakeholders. We hope that these negotiations will result in an interim transitional government that would be inclusive and take into account other political voices within the country. We also urge the international community and all regional powers that have leverage on the warring parties to use that influence and advocate for a lasting ceasefire, which is a condition for true dialogue. Mr. President, while it is difficult to predict how the coming days, months, or years will unfold, in particular with regard to the political and security situations, one thing that remains for certain is that Afghanistan is on the brink of a humanitarian catastrophe of which the first victims are women and children. The A3+1 would therefore like to highlight the importance of finding an urgent and sustainable solution to the already dire humanitarian crisis, which has been worsened by the recent fighting. The effects of the recent upsurge of violence, combined with those of climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic, have created a situation where more than a third of the population is experiencing food insecurity and thousands are internally displaced, the overwhelming majority being women and children. We call for the United Nations and the humanitarian agencies to step up their support to the displaced populations and honor the pledges made to the Afghan humanitarian plan. Mr. President, the Afghan people now, more than ever, need the support and solidarity of the international community and regional players to help them navigate this challenging time. Every effort must be made to mitigate the pains of the civil war and to assist them in their search for peace and a stable environment conducive to the pursuit of democratic governance as well as social and economic well-being. The A3+1 continue to welcome and fully support the good offices of the United Nations and all other diplomatic efforts by neighboring countries to reduce tension in order to reach a negotiated solution to the crisis. Furthermore, we emphasize that the search for peace must not be at the expense of Afghan human rights, particularly those of women, children, and Afghanistan's ethnic and religious minorities. While making peace requires settlement between combatants, we believe that the international community does not wish for peace processes to reward and legitimize the use of military interventions and association with terrorist organizations through political recognition. We recall how the Taliban came to be thrown out of power because of their support of Al-Qaeda. Reports of the release of prisoners affiliated to ISIS and Al-Qaeda by the Taliban are extremely disturbing. Such actions will embolden terrorist networks and motivate a resurgence of increased export of terrorism, particularly to countries in regions that have active conflict situations. In its statement of the 6th of August, the A3+1 recalled this Council's decision to split the Al-Qaeda and Taliban sanction lists in response to efforts by the Afghan government to negotiate a peace process with the Taliban that would lead to national reconciliation in Afghanistan. The purpose of this decision was to provide a future lifeline for members of the Taliban that renounce violence and disassociate themselves from Al-Qaeda. Therefore, the Council must not relent in its demand that the Taliban make sustained efforts to embrace peace, cease its links with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and engage in the peace process that will transform Afghanistan to a net exporter of peace. As we conclude, Mr. President, the A3+1 notes that the situation in Afghanistan is extremely volatile and unpredictable. Armed insurgent groups and terrorist groups across the world are watching closely in order to replicate the unraveling events. This Council must therefore carefully consider the decisions it makes, fully aware that building political tracks for entities using terrorism to achieve political ends will in the end be counterproductive. Finally, Kenya, Tunisia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Niger reaffirm their unwavering solidarity with the people of Afghanistan during these uncertain times and reaffirm our support for their vision for a peaceful and progressive country. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of Kenya for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ireland. You have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I want to thank the Secretary-General for his presence with us here today and for his very powerful words at the beginning of our meeting. Mr. President, we supported the convening of this urgent meeting today to discuss the unfolding tragic development in Afghanistan. Over the past weeks, we've witnessed, as we've heard in real time, the Taliban seizing control of Afghan cities by force, culminating in the loss of government control in Kabul. We've all seen the scenes of chaos at the airport. We cannot say that we were not warned of this possible outcome. In this room, we have heard many worrying alerts, not least in the courageous testimony of members of Afghan civil society. Sadly and tragically for so many, we failed to heed these warnings. Now we will have to address the consequences. Now, in the face of an unfolding crisis of tragic proportions, this Council will have to assume its responsibilities and act. Mr. President, this is a calamitous situation for all of the people of Afghanistan. As we have consistently done in this chamber, we condemn the appalling violence and the indiscriminate attacks perpetrated against civilians in Afghanistan. The violence and intimidation must end. It's clear that we have entered a new phase in Afghanistan. Peace will only be achieved through an agreed, inclusive, and negotiated solution. Violence does not provide legitimacy, nor does it deliver durable peace. Respect for the rule of law and compliance with international law, including international humanitarian law and human rights law, is imperative. We call now for the utmost restraint to protect lives and to ensure that the dire humanitarian needs be addressed. Given the urgency of the situation and the desperate plight facing the Afghan people, it is vital that we act to address the crisis facing Afghanistan. Lives are at imminent risk through worsening violence, displacement, and food insecurity. The international community has a responsibility to respond, to act to protect civilians, and to alleviate the suffering of the Afghan people. Safe and reliable humanitarian access must be guaranteed and protected, and the work of all relevant UN agencies and humanitarian partners be facilitated without exception. Mr. President, those who have worked for peace, human rights defenders who have endeavoured tirelessly to promote and protect the rights of their fellow citizens, must not be abandoned now. I wish to address the women of Afghanistan directly. Women who have the most at stake as democratic government dissolves and an uncertain future awaits. Lest there be any doubt as to the gravity of the situation, I am speaking to the women at the airport with their children and families trying to find a way out, to the women hiding in their homes, to the women sleeping in the streets, to the women still fighting for peace and human rights, though it may well now risk their lives. Women of Afghanistan, we hear you, and we hear your pleas to the international community at this dark time. The fear, indignation, and sense of betrayal you feel is understood. It is righteous. I call on this Council to stand with the women of Afghanistan. Their rights and their future participation in Afghan society cannot be sacrificed. This is our shared responsibility at this table. It must be our shared priority also. All of us around the table can and should agree that as a non-negotiable principle in all discussions, the rights of women in Afghanistan must be protected. This is the future of Afghanistan. The Taliban have reportedly said that women have nothing to fear from them, yet we hear multiple and credible reports of summary executions, forced marriages, and of sexual and gender-based violence. Telling the international community what it wants to hear will fool no one. We will not turn a blind eye to the truth. We condemn, in the strongest terms, the deliberate targeting of women and girls by the Taliban. Girls must be free to attend school, women must be able to participate fully in society, and those who speak up for human rights must be free to do so. In focusing on the needs of women, of course, I want to also condemn reported reprisals, attacks, and summary executions on Afghan men. This also must stop. Mr. President, it is high time to learn from the past, or we will be doomed to see the worst of history repeating itself in Afghanistan. 2 decades of progress are disintegrating on our watch. The Afghan people have worked too hard, lost too much, to see their futures repeat the past of their mothers, their fathers, grandmothers, and grandfathers, generations lost to conflict. Strong, enduring peace can only be built by inclusive and representative negotiation. Let us be clear here today, the future governance of Afghanistan can only have the support and endorsement of the international community if it guarantees the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women, includes minority groups and youth, upholds human rights and fundamental freedoms, and ensures adherence to the rule of law and accountability as set out in Council Resolution 2513. In our view, the Council needs to be prepared to consider further measures from the toolbox at its disposal as this crisis unfolds. Afghan Minister for Education Ranjina Hamidi spoke in recent hours of her fear, shared by many Afghan women, that she will be forced to pay the price for trying to make Afghanistan a better place, for being active in her society, simply realising her rights. Ireland calls for a clear message today from this Council. While much, including the political future of Afghanistan, is currently uncertain, what is clear is that the failure to fully respect and uphold the rights of all the people of Afghanistan, and in particular the rights and safety of women and girls, cannot and will not be accepted. We owe this to the women of Afghanistan and to all the people of Afghanistan who have kept faith with the promises of the international community for a brighter future. Our obligation is to act in solidarity with them all now in this time of crisis. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Ireland for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Mexico. You have the floor, please.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. México apoya la convocatoria a esta reunión de emergencia. Agradezco al secretario general por su informe sobre los acontecimientos más recientes en Afganistán. Quisiera agradecer igualmente a las delegaciones que están aquí presentes y agradezco la presencia también, la reconocemos, del representante permanente de Afganistán. En el transcurso de las últimas semanas y en especial durante este último fin de semana, el conflicto en Afganistán ha entrado en una fase más destructiva y más mortífera. El avance del Talibán sobre los principales centros urbanos y ahora Kabul cambió drásticamente la dinámica de poder y ha tenido un impacto humanitario extremadamente preocupante. La ofensiva militar deja claro que sigue sin negociarse un cese al fuego y que las cifras de víctimas por el conflicto son las más altas registradas. México rechaza la vía de la fuerza y de la violencia y subraya enfáticamente que debe respetarse el marco institucional del país y buscarse un proceso de reconciliación nacional. El futuro de Afganistán debe ser decidido democráticamente por todas y por todos los afganos. Mi país igualmente deplora de manera inequívoca los ataques deliberados contra la población civil. Los reportes de ejecuciones sumarias, de ataques deliberados contra mujeres, apaleamientos, restricciones y censura de medios de comunicación son señal de alarma para la comunidad internacional. El precio más alto del atrincheramiento político y militar en Afganistán lo continúan pagando los más vulnerables. La catastrófica trayectoria de violencia afecta a una población que se encuentra en condiciones cada vez más precarias y con muy pocas opciones, especialmente para mujeres y niñas. Personal humanitario, médicos, traductores y otros prestadores de servicios internacionales también se encuentran en especial vulnerabilidad en estos momentos. Y síntoma de ello es la ola masiva de desplazamientos que observamos y la desesperación de los civiles por huir del país. Señor presidente, la campaña militar ha resultado en un cambio drástico de control sobre el territorio y de los medios materiales. Mi país, México, llama urgentemente a que la comunidad internacional evalúe muy seriamente las transferencias de armas que podrían ser desviadas o acabar en manos equivocadas. Mientras exista la proliferación de armamento, el Talibán y otros grupos habrá sustento para consolidar sus objetivos por la vía de la fuerza. Por ello, es que urgimos a que no se aprueben transferencias irresponsables y a que se ejerzan los máximos estándares internacionales para contener el impacto catastrófico de la situación por la que atraviesa Afganistán. Pese a los acuerdos firmados y la existencia de un robusto marco de derecho internacional sobre combate al terrorismo, nos preocupa también que se abra la puerta a que Afganistán sea, una vez más, refugio seguro para grupos terroristas. Cualquier escenario para el futuro de Afganistán debe asegurar que esto no suceda. Señor presidente, la comunidad internacional y en especial el Consejo de Seguridad debe presentar un frente común para dejar en claro que el presente curso de acción resulta inaceptable y que se tienen que respetar los compromisos acordados y privilegiar la vía del diálogo y de la negociación política. Adicionalmente, solicitamos a aquellos que mantienen interlocución directa con el Talibán a que expresen su más sonora condena a los ataques contra civiles, en particular mujeres, niños y minorías, y llamar urgentemente a retomar las negociaciones de una forma constructiva. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Mexico for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation. You have the floor, please.
Благодарю вас, господин председатель. Мы благодарим генерального секретаря ООН за его соображения и оценки ситуации в Афганистане. Благодарим также постоянного представителя Афганистана, посла Гулама Исакзая. Внимательно следим за стремительно меняющейся ситуацией в Афганистане. С момента объявления о выводе иностранных войск мы все получали тревожные новости об эскалации насилия и жертвах. Вместе с тем мы видели, что крупные афганские города были сданы без особого сопротивления. С момента последнего обсуждения в Совете прошло всего 10 дней, а обстановка в стране за этот период изменилась до неузнаваемости. Сегодня наши взоры обращены на Кабул, который накануне спешно покидали первые лица республики, простые афганцы, а также часть дипломатического корпуса. Очевидно, что такой стремительный разворот стал неожиданностью для всех, включая тех, кто еще недавно громко заявлял о высоком уровне боеспособности подготовленных и обученных за 20 лет афганских силовиков. В целом продолжаем внимательно отслеживать ситуацию в стране. На данном этапе полагаем, что поддаваться паническим настроениям не стоит. Важно, что удалось избежать массового кровопролития среди гражданского населения. Призываем все вовлеченные афганские стороны воздерживаться от вооруженных действий и содействовать урегулированию мирным путем. Исходим из того, что международное сообщество обязано не оставлять усилий, чтобы помочь Афганистану достичь национального примирения, чем, в частности, активно занималась расширенная тройка в лице России, США, Китая и Пакистана. Полагаем, что важную роль в этом мог бы сыграть и Иран. Что касается наших дальнейших шагов, официальных шагов в отношении талибов, то мы будем определяться с этими шагами в зависимости от развития ситуации и их конкретных действий. По имеющимся у нас сведениям, талибы уже приступили к наведению общественного порядка, а также подтвердили гарантии безопасности гражданских лиц и сотрудников иностранных дипломатических миссий. Рассчитываем, что в сложившихся условиях дипперсоналу и ООНовскому присутствию в Афганистане будет обеспечена безопасность, а их учреждениям неприкосновенность. В этих условиях посольство России в Кабуле продолжает функционировать в штатном режиме. Господин председатель, нас по-прежнему беспокоит сохраняющееся в стране присутствие теругрозы, включая ИГИЛ-Хорасан, чья терактивность рискует выплеснуться за пределы Афганистана и ставить тем самым под удар безопасность соседних государств в Центральной Азии. С терроризмом неразрывно связана и наркопроблема. Деградация обстановки в Афганистане за последние месяцы привела и к резкому ухудшению гуманитарной ситуации. Обеспокоенность вызывают многочисленные сводки о количестве внутренне перемещенных лиц и потоках беженцев за пределы страны. Это создает дополнительную нагрузку на сопредельные республики, включая Таджикистан, Узбекистан, Иран и Пакистан, не говоря уже о риске инфильтрации в регион боевиков, в том числе под видом беженцев. Находимся в регулярном контакте со всеми 5 странами Центральной Азии, как в двустороннем плане, так и по линии региональных организаций ШОС и ОДКБ. Господин председатель, мы по-прежнему заинтересованы в скорейшем мирном урегулировании в Афганистане, последующей стабилизации в стране и ее постконфликтном восстановлении. Убеждены, что от прекращения многолетней кровопролитной войны и нацпримирения выиграют все – народ Афганистана, его региональные соседи и мир в целом. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Vietnam. You have the floor, please.
Yeah, thank you, President. And I thank the Secretary-General for your presence and for your briefings. I also welcome the presence of representative of Afghanistan to our briefing today. Mr. President, we have followed the situation in Afghanistan, especially in the recent days, with deep concerns. This situation may affect badly the security and stability of not only Afghanistan, but also the region, especially neighboring countries. We are particularly concerned about the high number of civilian casualties reported over the past few weeks. In this regard, I wish to highlight the following. First, the utmost priority now is to protect civilians. All parties must respect their obligation under international humanitarian and human rights law, ensure the protection of civilians, particularly the most vulnerable, such as women and children. Indispensable services to civilian population must be ensured. The safety and security of UN personnel, humanitarian workers, foreign citizens, international organizations, diplomatic mission and personnel must be guaranteed. Second, we join others in calling for an end to violence, restoration of security and civil order. We call on all parties in Afghanistan to engage in dialogue, resolve their differences, and promote national reconciliation, respecting aspiration of Afghan people for a long-term peace, stability, and development of the country. Third, urgent efforts are needed to avoid a humanitarian catastrophe of the country. Essential services for civilian population must not be disrupted, including those to address food insecurity and COVID-19 pandemic. Immediate, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access must be ensured to reach the Afghan people in need. We also call on the UN, regional and international partners to redouble their effort to achieve the above-mentioned priorities, with special urgent attention to the protection and the assistance to civilian population in this difficult time. Last but not least, we would like to commend the effort of UNAMA and stress the importance of ensuring the security and safety of the mission. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Vietnam for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China. You have the floor, please.
谢谢主席。我欢迎古特雷斯秘书长出席今天的会议，也感谢他刚才的通报。我也认真听取了阿富汗常驻代表的发言。当前阿富汗局势已发生重大变化，我们尊重阿富汗人民的意愿和选择。阿富汗战乱已经持续40多年，停止战争，实现和平，既是3000多万阿富汗人民的一致心声，也是国际社会和地区国家的共同期盼。当务之急是尽快恢复和平、稳定和秩序，最大限度避免无谓的伤亡和产生大规模难民。驻阿外交机构和外交人员的权益不可侵犯，在阿外国公民的安全和利益必须得到尊重和保障。阿富汗各方均有责任保护民众生命和财产安全，并为外国公民安全居留和有序撤离提供保障。主席先生，中方始终主张政治解决是阿富汗问题的唯一出路。 当前阿富汗国家前景处在历史性的十字路口。中方注意到，昨天阿富汗塔利班方面表示，阿富汗战争业已结束，将协商建立开放包容的伊斯兰政府，并采取负责任行动，确保阿富汗公民和外国驻阿使团安全。中方期待这些表态得到落实，确保阿富汗局势实现平稳过渡，各类恐怖主义和犯罪行径得到遏制，让阿富汗人民远离战乱，重建美好家园。我们希望阿富汗塔利班同阿各党派、各民族团结起来，建立符合阿自身国情、广泛包容的政治架构，为阿实现持久和平奠定基础。过去20多年里，伊斯兰国、基地组织、东伊运等恐怖组织在阿富汗境内聚集发展，对国际和地区和平与安全构成严重威胁。阿富汗绝不能再度成为恐怖分子天堂，这是阿富汗未来任何政治解决方案必须坚守的底线。希望阿富汗塔利班切实履行承诺，彻底切断同一切恐怖组织的联系。各国应根据国际法和安理会决议履行义务，合作打击一切恐怖主义，坚决防止伊斯兰国、基地组织、东伊运等恐怖组织趁乱做大。当前阿富汗人道局势十分严峻，人道援助和疫情防控均面临巨大压力。国际社会应加大向阿富汗和接收了大量阿流离失所者的阿富汗邻国提供人道援助，帮助缓解地区人道危机。有关各方应当确保国际人道救援机构的工作不受阻碍。国际社会还应继续帮助阿及其邻国尽快控制疫情。主席先生，阿富汗当前乱局同外国部队的仓促撤出有直接关系。有关国家应当切实兑现支持阿富汗和平、和解、重建的承诺，在阿富汗问题上发挥建设性作用。在尊重阿人主导权和阿邻国有关努力的基础上，在政治、安全、发展、人道、禁毒等领域继续向阿提供建设性帮助。刚才不少成员在发言中提到，希望阿富汗邻国和地区国家发挥更大的作用。据了解，一些阿邻国和地区国家提出参加今天会议的请求，很遗憾，他们的请求未被允许。长期以来，联合国驻阿富汗援助团为支持阿富汗和平重建发挥了重要作用。考虑到当前地面形势已发生重大变化，我们希望秘书长就保障联阿团人员安全做出妥善安排，也期待秘书长就未来联合国在阿的存在问题，尽快向安理会提出切实可行的意见和建议。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for his statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of India. Allow me at the outset to warmly welcome the Secretary-General and his very important remarks. I also welcome the presence of the Permanent Representative of Afghanistan to the United Nations. The Council is meeting for the second time in a period of 10 days to discuss the situation in Afghanistan. In this short period of time, we have witnessed dramatic changes in the situation. We have also seen very unfortunate scenes at the Hamid Karzai International Airport in Kabul. there is widespread panic among the people. Women and children are in distress. Incidents of firing have been reported from the city, including at the airport. While the security situation remains precarious, a grave humanitarian crisis is unfolding. We have heard urgent appeals from all quarters, including from the Secretary-General. It is time for the international community, in particular this Council, to act and ensure an immediate cessation of violence and contain any possible crisis and mitigate its consequences. As a neighbor of Afghanistan, as a friend of its people, the current situation prevailing in the country is of great concern to us in India. Afghan men, women, and children are living under a constant state of fear. They are uncertain about their future. Everyone is concerned about the increasing violations of the fundamental rights of the Afghan citizens. Afghans are worried about whether their right to live with dignity would be respected. There are many unanswered questions. We hope that the situation stabilizes soon and the parties concerned address the humanitarian and security issues. We also hope that there is an inclusive dispensation which represents all sections of Afghan society. Voices of Afghan women, aspirations of Afghan children, and the rights of minorities must be respected. A broader representation would help the arrangement gain more acceptability and legitimacy. The current situation in Afghanistan has numerous challenges. However, there are a few opportunities. If there is a zero tolerance for terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, and it is ensured that the territory of Afghanistan is not used by terrorist groups to threaten or attack any other country, then Afghanistan's neighbors and the region would feel safer. The Secretary-General has underlined this unequivocally just now. Afghanistan has already seen enough bloodshed in the past. It is time for the international community to come together unitedly, rising above any partisan interests, to support the people of Afghanistan in their desire for peace, stability, and security in the country, and to enable all Afghans, including women, children, and minorities, to live in peace and dignity. India has contributed significantly in recent years to the development of the country. In this context, Indian development projects has been undertaken in critical areas of power, water, road, healthcare, education, agriculture, and capacity building. India's emphasis has been on the welfare and the well-being of the people of Afghanistan. Before the current crisis unfolded, India had ongoing development projects in every one of the 34 provinces of Afghanistan. As underscored by Council members, we need to continue to support the robust work of UNAMA and ensure their safety. We call upon the parties concerned to maintain law and order, ensure the safety and security of all concerned, including UN, diplomatic, and consular personnel, and observe human rights and international humanitarian law in all circumstances in Afghanistan. Thank you. I now resume my function as President of the Council. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I'll now adjourn the meeting so that the Council can continue its discussion on the subject in closed consultations. I kindly ask all observers to exit the chamber upon the adjournment of this meeting. The meeting is adjourned.
Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to speak to you today about the situation in Afghanistan. As you know, we had requested participation in this Security Council meeting, but unfortunately, as was the case on the last occasion, Pakistan was denied the opportunity to address the Council. And this is most regrettable because we believe that Pakistan has an important contribution to make at this important and vital juncture in the destiny of Afghanistan and the stability and peace in our region. India's partisan and obstructionist actions are an illustration of the hatred for Pakistan which exists in India, and their peak, and that their plan to continue the conflict in Afghanistan and to continue the sponsorship of terrorism against Pakistan from Afghanistan could be neutralized once peace is restored throughout Afghanistan. We are not surprised by India's anti-Pakistan partisanship. This confirms Pakistan's long-held contention that India does not deserve to be on the Security Council, much less to aspire to become a permanent member of the Council. It is in violation of the resolutions of the Security Council on Jammu and Kashmir and is in the process of conducting a campaign of genocide against the people of Jammu and Kashmir with 900,000 troops deployed in the occupied territory. While blocking Pakistan and other neighbors of Afghanistan from addressing the Council, the representative of a now defunct regime was invited to speak to the Council. There was considerable pathos in this spectacle. Ambassador Essek is an esteemed colleague, but the person who appointed him here recently has fled Afghanistan to cause a betrayal from some of his own ministers and the army chief. It is therefore unclear on whose behalf Ambassador Essek participated in the Security Council. Ladies and gentlemen, if we were allowed to speak to the Council today, I would have first of all informed the Council of the meeting of the National Security Committee of Pakistan, chaired by Prime Minister Imran Khan, where the overall situation in Afghanistan was discussed. Pakistan has been a victim of decades of conflict in Afghanistan, and we desire peace and stability in our neighborhood. The world knows of the sacrifices that we have made. In our meeting today, the Pakistan stance that the conflict in Afghanistan never had a military solution was confirmed. The ideal time to end the conflict through negotiations might have been when the US and NATO troops were at their maximum military strength in Afghanistan. Continuation of foreign military presence for a longer duration now would not have yielded any positive outcome. Therefore, endorsement by the Biden administration of the previous US administration's decision of troop withdrawal was indeed a logical conclusion to this conflict. It is now time for the international community to work together to ensure an inclusive political settlement for a long-term peace, security, and development of Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan is making active efforts to promote an inclusive political settlement in Afghanistan. We, at our invitation, the leadership of a number of political parties and groups in Afghanistan, representing all the multi-ethnic groups apart from the Pashtuns, are present in Islamabad and have met with our foreign minister and with our leadership today. They have promised to engage continuously with the Taliban and to try to evolve an inclusive Afghan government. Pakistan will work with them and with the Taliban representatives to advance this objective, an objective of an inclusive political government, which is important for durable peace and stability in Afghanistan. If we had spoken in the Council, we would have also informed the Council of the efforts we are making to facilitate the safe evacuation of diplomats, representatives of international organizations, and others from Afghanistan. Pakistan's Foreign Secretary today briefed the diplomatic corps in Islamabad that the Embassy of Pakistan in Kabul will continue to facilitate visas for diplomats and other international personnel. Whenever needed, arrangements will be made for issuing visas to such people on arrival. A facilitation center has been set up by our Ministry of Interior to ensure the expeditious processing of visas and other requirements to enable the smooth and timely evacuation from Kabul. We will try to mount a series of flights to Kabul airport as soon as conditions allow in order to continue the evacuation which we have already started. Earlier today, we have evacuated a number of people from the Danish embassy, 421 Afghan employees of the Danish embassy, which we are evacuating from Kabul. Thirdly, Pakistan has called upon all Afghan parties, including the Taliban, to ensure the preservation of law and order in Kabul and elsewhere. Our immediate priorities should be aimed at the maintenance of law and order and safety and security of all Afghan civilians, especially women and children. Fundamental human rights must be upheld. All civilian property and infrastructure must be protected. There must be complete respect for human rights and international humanitarian law. And we support the statement of the Secretary-General in this regard. Fourthly, the safety and security of the diplomatic community and premises, as well as UN personnel, humanitarian workers, and other international staff, is paramount. There is need to urgently address the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. UNAMA, we hope, will make an evaluation of the humanitarian needs of the Afghan people. We urge the UN Secretary-General to report as soon as possible on the humanitarian needs in Afghanistan in order to mobilize emergency help through OCHA and other international agencies. We call on all Afghan parties to ensure unhindered access and humanitarian aid across Afghanistan, as well as to ensure the safety and security of UN personnel and humanitarian workers. Pakistan will facilitate such operations. Ladies and gentlemen, apart from these immediate actions, the international community should look ahead to other steps designed to promote durable peace and stability in Afghanistan. The infrastructure destroyed in this long conflict needs to be reconstructed, including the transport infrastructure, which can enable Afghanistan to serve as a hub for regional trade and commerce. The international community also needs to engage with the new authorities in Afghanistan to eliminate the threat posed by terrorist organizations which have used Afghanistan's territory with the sponsorship of the intelligence agencies of some of our neighbors for attacks and sabotage against Pakistan and other neighbors of Afghanistan. Groups such as the Daesh, the TTP, the JUA, the ETIM, IMU, these are all organizations which must be contained and their activities constrained and eliminated from the territory of Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, that is what I had to say. Open to your questions.
Ambassador, you talk about an inclusive government for Afghanistan, but don't the Taliban now want to rule on their own? Do you have any indication from the Taliban that they would accept an inclusive government? And if they don't, will Pakistan recognize the Taliban again as the government of Afghanistan?
I think the Taliban have said that they will accept an inclusive government, that they would wish to have a government which represents all groups in Afghanistan. And we would like to take them at their word. We are working towards that end. That's why we have invited the representatives of the Afghan parties, or the non-Pashtun Afghan parties. They are in Islamabad today. We're talking to them. They are agreeable to engage with the Taliban in order to form an inclusive authority. And we hope that our efforts and the efforts of other friends will be successful.
Michelle Nichols from Reuters. How important is the role of women in a new Afghanistan government, and how concerned are you by reports of rights abuses by the Taliban against women?
Thank you. No, it is obvious that the women of Afghanistan must continue to play an important role. They have demonstrated their ability to do so, and we are hopeful that the Taliban authorities and the new inclusive government will respect that and will enable them to play that role. The Taliban statements have said that they accept girls' education, women's working under an Islamic system. And as you know, in Islam, women have equal rights, and we hope that those rights will be respected in any new formation in Afghanistan. I'm sorry?
And that women should be a part of any new government? There should be female members of a new Afghan government?
Well, we hope there will be female members of the Afghan government. It is, of course, for the Afghans themselves to come forward and put forward women candidates or women who are willing to be part of this inclusive government. But we certainly, from our part, would hope that women will be represented and will be able to participate in the future of Afghanistan.
Did you say you're evacuating Pakistani nationals or Afghan nationals?
We are evacuating all diplomatic personnel. All diplomatic personnel who wish to evacuate and wish to come through Pakistan. All representatives of international agencies who have requested our help in being evacuated. And all other personnel who feel that they are in danger, we would be willing to look at the possibility of taking them out.
So you're helping UN national staff and international staff
Absolutely.
evacuate?
Absolutely.
Via Pakistan?
We are in touch with all the international agencies, IMF, World Bank, etc., who have offices in Kabul. And whoever wishes to leave from the diplomatic personnel and from the international agencies, we will process the visas. Some of the visas we will issue on arrival. So we will facilitate their evacuation. The issue, of course, now is Kabul airport. Apparently, there has been some incidents there. So I hope that we will be able to resume flights. The Pakistan International Airlines will arrange the flights, and we will take out people who we process.
When was the last time a flight went out from?
Today.
Today?
This
morning.
They're
at the airport?
This morning we evacuated personnel from the Danish mission.
So the Taliban is cooperating with Pakistan on this evacuation?
Well, the international airport, as you know, is under U.S. control now.
Ambassador, one more question. In terms of the way Pakistan sees things, the inclusive government, but after that, does democracy return to Afghanistan? Does Pakistan believe Afghanistan should still have a democratic system?
Well, you know, James, we have a democratic system. For Afghanistan, the final choice is it's for the people of Afghanistan to choose whether they will have, what is the system they want. They want the Islamic system. I think they have to talk amongst themselves and evolve what sort of system they want. It's obvious that we will need a new constitution, will be needed, and it is for them, therefore, to evolve that constitution amongst themselves, and we would not wish to dictate anything in that regard.
We heard from different Security Council members today saying the Security Council should act. The Secretary-General also said this. What do you think the Security Council should do in this situation?
Well, I think in my opening remarks, I tried to spell out what we think should happen. The Security Council, I think, first of all, it's important that the UN is there and should continue to be there. The humanitarian needs need to be met, and the UN is best placed to do that, unanimous there. We hope a good early assessment will be made of what is needed in terms of humanitarian help for the Afghan people, and that this will be provided, and Pakistan stands ready to facilitate such humanitarian help. As far as any other actions, I think we should, the United Nations should see what the Afghans require and to continue to help with the negotiation for a inclusive political government. I think that the role for the United Nations, we should continue to support the Afghans to come together. And that sort of encouragement should be necessary, I think. Thank you so much. That we will take you over, because that depends on the other side too. But if you want to go to the border and see the situation, and there have been various kinds of reports coming out, please, she'll arrange your visas, and we'll put you on a flight whenever you want.
Great, thank you.
The U.S. Marines?
We understand that the airport is under the control of the U.S.
Right. Okay.
So that's, we have to work with them to get people out.
And they're cooperating, or what? I mean, what's the scene?
No, I think that's the purpose. To be there is to enable people to leave. You know.
How long will this continue? This evacuation?
No, I think that's a good question to ask the U.S.
Can you clarify, should the Afghan ambassador to UN continue to perform these functions or not?
I won't want to address it. I hope that he is able to represent whatever is the authorities that emerge in Afghanistan, so he represents his country rather than himself.
Just to represent himself, not the country?
No, but at the moment it's very unclear who he represents. The government which nominated him is not there. The president the president who signed his papers has fled. So the question arises, who does he represent? I hope he will continue to represent the new authorities, but that's for the Afghan authorities to determine. So at the moment, it's a bit of a limbo, you know, his situation.
Thank you very much.
the international community needs to come together and to act with one single voice to say that we want an inclusive government in Afghanistan, that want human rights in general, women's rights in particular, to be respected, and we want terrorism not to have anymore a safe haven in Afghanistan. And for that we need the unity of the Security Council, the unity of the international community to be able to speak with one single voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary.
say that you have all heard the discussions in the Security Council. I don't think I need to elaborate on what has transpired. I'm particularly grateful that the Secretary-General found time to come and brief the Security Council. I think what he said was extremely important, and that is something which the Council members need to take back. You also heard that the Council members, they had reaffirmed the fact that we need immediate cessation of hostilities and violence. And I think there was also a sentiment among the Council members that for acceptance and legitimacy, there needs to be a political settlement. And that political settlement should fully respect the human rights of women, children, and minorities. And you have also heard the sentiments among the Council members on zero tolerance for terrorism. And the Secretary-General unequivocally underlined this important aspect. And for all of us, the safety and security of the UN personnel, for the diplomatic and the consular staff, they are extremely important. And lastly, there was a great deal of sentiment where there was support for UNAMA and also support for the work they are doing, and also support for the safety and the security of UNAMA and UN personnel. So this is what I have to tell you. Thank you.
What about the recognition of new authorities in Afghanistan?
No, thank you very much. No, I just wanted to mention this. Thank you. The discussions are on to see how best we can address some of the issues in the press statement. And we do sincerely hope that this will come out sooner rather than later. Thank you. I really hope so. Thank you.
I'm speaking now in Estonia, together with Norway as the pen holders on Afghanistan. The Council has reached a press statement. It will be issued shortly. The main points of it are that we're calling for an immediate end to violence, restoration of security, civil and constitutional order. The Council will be expressing its deep concern about the serious violations in the country of humanitarian law and human rights abuses, and also focusing that all parties should allow immediate, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access, and obviously recalling the support for the work of UNAMA. As I said, this is the pen holders letting you know what will be in the press statement. The press statement is on behalf of all the Council members. Thank you very much.
What leverage do you have with the Taliban,